As I mentioned, someone who has joined us on this program before, and we always appreciate his time and look forward to his insight, specifically as we do battle with ISIS and how that relates to terrorism, which hit so hard when it hit in San Bernardino, California. That in the wake of the killings in France and the threat of terrorism globally is something that is certainly occupying a lot of conversation, a lot of thought, and if you watched the Republican debate last night, it was the subject of practically the entire 2-hour debate on CNN last night. So we have an opportunity to spend a few minutes with the Admiral, Joe Sestak. And Admiral, thanks for coming on.
Darryl, it's good to be back with you. Thank you.
We always appreciate the time, and I watched the debate last night, the Republican debate. Did you see any of that?
This morning I saw some excerpts and read some about it.
Yeah. Was there anything you heard that you found that you could agree with? I imagine there was quite a bit that you might have disagreed with.
Well, the part that I did read that I agreed with was Rand Paul. I agreed with him that entering Iraq, General Powell had told us, if you break it, you own it. And unfortunately, I think a lot of these splinter groups that have sprung up after we broke it, like ISIS, which came out of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, we're still there. And I think that from Rand Paul was pretty gutsy on his part to say it. But I agreed with that because even when I went there, and I had been bombing away from my carrier battle group in Afghanistan, went into the Gulf because we thought we were going to do a running start to the war. I went in to see my boss, the 3-star, and he said, "What do you think?" I said, "We're ready to go," because we thought it'd be a running start to Iraq. Mm-hmm. And he said, "No, what do you personally think?" And I said, "Chief," I said, "I don't understand why we're doing this for no other reason. We're dividing our forces between Afghanistan and Iraq when we do it. And second, I don't see a clear and present danger to America. I think this is going to be a tragedy." So I did agree with that.
Let's talk, and before we get specifically into the weeds with the what I refer to as the Sestak doctrine, as it relates to the war against ISIS or ISIL, yes, or whatever we're calling it these days. How do you agree or disagree with the current policy of the Obama administration
towards ISIS? Yeah, I don't think that we have approached this threat well from the beginning. I thought we were slow. For example, ISIS had driven from Syria all the way to 60 miles from Baghdad, Fallujah, before their expansion and their supply lines and all kind of ran out of gas. I mean, they were there, they could fight, but they couldn't do it anymore because all of a sudden the special forces, the best trained forces of Iraq were there. And then they hunkered down and began to build this state, but it took us, that was about February 2014, it took about 6 months before we began to help out the Kurds and help out Baghdad. So I thought first we were slow. Second, I believe that our military strategy isn't one to secure the peace. So, for example, ISIS, as they stopped there, began to hunker down and expand here and there a little bit, but began to create a state. And it actually gets about $2 billion a year in assets from selling oil, from selling wheat, from extortion.
This is the caliphate.
Yes,
right.
The caliphate. And it is able to actually use that money for a state-sponsored terrorism, much like Libya did under Gaddafi. So if we don't look at it as a state, not just a terrorist threat, we will primarily do a military strategy that we're doing, which is trying to disrupt this terrorist threat, trying to take down its mid-level and high-level officials. And we should do that. But what we really have to do is knock the legs out from under a state, like we did when we went into Iraq and we clobbered the government bureaucracies that were collecting the taxes. That's what we need to do, because after Paris was struck, we gave to the French the next day intelligence that we had where the government agencies were that collected all and exported all this illegal oil was getting money. And second, we should destroy the oil fields that give us $600 million a year. So our military strategy isn't one that I feel is the correct one, because we don't look at ISIS as what it is, this illegitimate state. And therefore, we're going after battle space rather than destroying the state's power and where it gets it from. That's my first point.
Do you believe if we eliminate the state, if we take that away from ISIS, that they no longer are the recruiter globally that they are currently for terrorists inside and outside of the U.S.?
No, and that gets to the second point, Darryl, is that second, what we have to do is we should be able to bring together diplomatically those nations that are there, like Iran, that are in Syria, and Russia that is there, often adversarial to us, and want different interests than us, like keeping that dictator Assad around for a while, but yet have a common threat as us as ISIS, and have them with the Arab nation come together to be on the ground to then destroy and take down the battle space on the ground as we take down the support for the state from the air. But then, above everything else, to do what you just said, third point, you must have what the end state is going to be. So if you want the idea that of ISIS to go away and not be attractive, you've got to have the Arab forces leading, because they are Arab, and you have to have Sunni forces leading it. And second, what you have to do is, when we put our military there, is if you break this caliphate, we want to make sure that what is after it is some sort of stability. And that's where I'm concerned that the administration doesn't have it right, because if we're putting 50 special forces in there, like Syria a few weeks ago, and they're helping the Kurds drive south to Sunni strongholds that are now occupied by ISIS, and they destroy ISIS, well, then two things. When the Sunnis come back, will the Kurds leave, or are they going to try to create a Kurdistan? Have we thought that through? And second, if you leave a vacuum there, like in a continual fight between Kurds and Sunnis, then ISIS will just lurk into the alleyways and eventually come back. So to secure the peace, we have to understand what the end state is. So whether it's a semi-autonomous Kurdistan, whether the Sunnis and Shia are separated, we have to get this coalition to agree what the end state will be. And I don't see that strategy laid out at all.
Doesn't matter, and again, my orientation is probably influenced, having watched 2 hours of this last night, by the Republican debate over some of this stuff. But does the fact that the president seems not willing to use the term radical Islam, does that matter to you?
It doesn't matter to me, because I'm a military guy. I went on the ground in Afghanistan, a Muslim country, when I was head of the Navy's anti-terrorism unit near the beginning of the war. And I was there for a very short mission, Darryl. I mean, nothing like the Marines and the Army. I was in, did my mission, came out. But I was commanding a battle group with Muslims, who I would have, as fellow shipmates, lay down my life for, and they for me. To me, are these extremists, are these radicals, etc.? Yeah. But to me, it is not something to where I'm going to be a better warrior, because these are criminals. These are brutal thugs, and I just want to take them down. And I have great respect for so many of those within the Muslim faith. I fought and went to war with them, and I would have died with them. And so to me, it doesn't help the cause any, just because somebody wants to have a certain label. I do agree, though, with you, even though you didn't bring it up, that I didn't agree, and I said it on television, I think it was television, that when the president didn't want to use the word global war of terror a few years ago, I didn't want to do away with that, because I felt the war was still ongoing.
What about the relocating refugees, Syrian refugees, into this country?
Yeah, look, I think that we have a process that nobody from Syria presently today, or refugees, can come into America, even step foot here for 18 to 24 months, till they've been vetted during that 1.5, 2-year time frame. That's how long it takes for the vetting. And the priority, of course, as you know, even for the 2,000 who have come in, has been women, ahead of households, and their children. Now, there's been about 4% of young men who have come in those 2,000. But we have 9 agencies, I think it is, that do this vetting. I might be off by a number or two. Background check. They even take pictures of their eyeballs and fingerprints and go into databases, and then they do these checks. And after 18 to 24 months, if they don't pass it, they don't come here. I mean, they're staying over there until we do it. Do I feel we've got a great system down that we can, regardless of faith, make sure that those refugees that are going to be properly vetted? I sure do. And I think to make a discrimination based upon faith, when we are about freedom of religion, I don't understand that. And I kind of say that very strongly because those 18 to 24 months is a pretty darn hard vetting system. By the way, there's an extra classified program on that, and always has been for years for those coming from Syria that I can't even read because I no longer have access to that classification to doubly make sure.
Well, I don't know. I guess with this woman obviously being involved and maybe involved in the radicalization of her husband in San Bernardino, certainly bringing in women sort of as a new color to it, certainly.
Well, you bring up a good point there, because there's really something that we did that the administration didn't want to have happen, but I think shows where people have to understand if we are going to do good security, you've got to use all the tools available. And that is that after San Bernardino, our agencies that protect us could only go back 2 years in records, phone records, to see who are they talking to. Because we had stopped about 4 days earlier that NSA program, where we used to be able to go back 5 years. Look, I understand that people thought, understandably, that the FISA court, the court to which we make sure the NSA does things right, as they do surveillance through cyberspace and the Internet, failed us. But that doesn't mean you throw the system and our security out. You make sure that the FISA court works, because this is a new type of danger over this past decade where they use the Internet and communications and cyberspace to do things. And looking for a needle in a haystack is often what we're doing, but only the NSA has the ability to go back and do that, and we can protect our civil rights as well as protect us by not having done away with a program we probably could have made work and protect our civil rights correctly.
I don't recall whether the point was made last night during the forum or I may have heard this elsewhere, but someone was making the point that there are parallels between the conflict that we're having with ISIS and Vietnam to the extent that military hands are tied or restricted by political decisions. Are you afraid of that? Do you think that exists currently under the current circumstance?
I can't tell you whether it exists or not, and I'm not trying to sidestep the question. I just don't know. But if it does, then something is wrong. If the military isn't willing to, or isn't proffering what it truly believes, then I also put the blame on the military. The military feels very strongly it has a different opinion, and it's not being heard, and it's hurting to the security of America, then the head of that military has a duty, I think, to say, I think if we don't do this, and I'm not just talking onesies or twosies, I'm talking a significant change, and he feels we're going about the wrong strategy and he can't safely execute it to his duties, then that gentleman or gentle lady, whoever in the future, needs to step aside and make that clear. So I can't tell you, but I do know this. I think that the administration needs to step back and establish what our end game is. Well, Clausewitz said it pretty well. You don't take the first step in war without considering the last. And when we toppled in that war with Saddam Hussein, we toppled him. Nobody was thinking about the day after. No one was prepared with the Shia and the Sunni fighting amongst themselves that we had to stay there so long. And if they don't figure out that, as Kissinger said, that policy is judged how it ends, not how it begins. If somebody doesn't figure out the end state, we will have exactly what you brought up, Darryl. We'll break that caliphate, but afterwards, are we just left with ISIS stick at hiding up in the mountains or something like that. We have to secure the peace like we did at the end of World War II with great leaders, where Roosevelt and Churchill met even before the United States came into the war and established the Atlanta Charter that said, here's the principles that we want and when the war ends and what we stand for. And that type of leadership I think we don't have, certainly not in the Senate. Anyone down there would be able to think this way.
All right. Well, we have to leave it there for the time being, but always appreciate the time, and I know we'll talk again.
Darryl, thanks for having me on. Have a great Pennsylvania Day.
All right. Very good. Appreciate that. And that, of course, Joe Sestak joining us